Good evening. Let us pray. Lord of the nations, we come before you with a full heart and a full agenda and a full plate tonight. We are worried about Milton as we recover from Helene. We are remembering Israel and Gaza and Lebanon, Russia and Ukraine. An election gets closer and we get anxious. So we thank you for this opportunity to pause, to reflect, to learn, and to be reminded that the world is in your hands and that Jesus comes to bring love and we get to share in his ministry. So let your spirit move among us, bless and guide Amy and her team, that we may all come away hopeful and inspired and ready to serve for Jesus' sake. Amen.
Thank you, Bishop Satterlee. Hello, friends. I can greet you as such after several weeks together. This is the final session in our series on loving Christ and neighbor in an election year, and which, of course, is something we should be doing all the time, not just an election year, but with both the opportunities and challenges of this time. We've spent time looking at civic engagement from a faith lens. We've looked at theology of government and how Lutherans approach that relationship. We've talked about depolarization and some of the first steps we can make as congregations to take down the temperature and approach one another in loving and respectful ways across political differences and divides. We've talked about accompaniment, how we walk with communities nearby and far with understanding and faithful engagement. And we've also looked at a little bit at ELCA social teaching and how that undergirds our witness and our life and our work for justice together. So that's a lot of stuff, and the first session was 6 weeks ago, so it's a lot to have retained. But I'm joined tonight by six individuals who do it all. They bring this all together: civic engagement, government relations, depolarization, discipleship, accompaniment, social teaching, and all the rest. And they do it in a very special call to work in state public policy. Um, in the ELCA, we have a state public policy network. Currently in these states that are listed here, I know we have quite a few folks from Michigan, and this does not include Michigan. At this time, there used to be one out of Lutheran Social Services of Michigan, but because we recognize that change in policy as well as equipping of disciples for civic life can't all happen from the national level, that there's so much that we can do at the state level to address policy, to be present in congregations, to work for positive change and principles of justice, and work the work of reconciliation through these state public policy offices. And so I'm joined here tonight by six directors from six different states who will meet in turn as we do some interviews with them. And I hope that the topics that we cover are going to spur some of your thinking about what you can do wherever you live to go a step further in this kind of engagement, what you can still do in an election year, both before, during, and after the election, as well as because of the interest around Christian nationalism and its impact on our communities, that we'll spend some time looking at that. After each little section, we'll have a pause. If there's questions in the chat, we'll engage those. And if not, we will keep going. So thanks all for your attention. And the first of our public policy directors, who I'm going to call up, is going to be Peter Severson. And we're going to chat a bit about what's so important about state public policy, how we use social teaching in it, and what kind of impact this is making in the state where he serves, which is Colorado. So, Peter, who are you, and tell us about where you serve?
Who am I? The big question.
The big question.
Yes, right. Well, by way of introduction, hello everyone. Thanks for the invitation for all of us to join this session today. As Amy said, I'm Peter Severson. I serve in Colorado, and I've been the director of our Lutheran Advocacy Office in Colorado for 10 and a half years now. It's a long it's a long time. And I've been a part of the Rocky Mountain Synod staff. Our office in Colorado is actually a synodical position. And not only that, we are one of two offices on the staff of the Rocky Mountain Synod. My colleague Kurt Rager serves in New Mexico. So our synod covers 4 states plus the western panhandle of Texas. So we're a huge geographic territory. But we've also invested in advocacy as a synod for 40 years. Both Colorado and New Mexico have been around for 40 years. And our investment alongside the investment of ELCA World Hunger is what's made this possible. And that is that is the role in which I've joyfully been able to serve. And as Bishop Satterley noted, we have a new bishop. We're very excited, thanks be to God, that Bishop Megan Johnston Ilabuni was just installed on Saturday. She was elected back in April, took office on August 1st, and now has formally had her installation. So we're very excited about that as well.
Yeah. So, Peter, how did you get involved in this world of faith-based advocacy?
Well, that's also a very good question that I was thinking about very recently because a week ago Sunday I was visiting our campus ministry at the University of Northern Colorado in Greeley, and it's a Lutheran Episcopal campus ministry. And one of the students there asked me this exact same question. I think maybe with an interest in like how does one find oneself in this world? I think all of us, all of the directors from states that are here, and Amy and anyone in our DC office can all tell their own story. My story, I guess, starts through serving in global mission in the church. I guess it didn't start there, but that was a formative moment. After college, I ended up serving in Mexico through the Young Adults in Global Mission, which is a program of the ELCA for young adults in their 20s to serve abroad with our Lutheran partners. And I served in Mexico at a couple of different sites, one of which was for people with disabilities making wheelchairs, and another of which was a human rights office. And it was through that sort of year that I saw sort of a more expanded vision of what it would mean, what it could mean to follow God's call to service in the world. And I felt very a strong degree of motivation that I had not ever felt in academia, which is what I assumed my career would be. So when I came back to the United States after that year of service, I dutifully went off to my grad school program, and it just did not click in the same way. And I do credit that year of YAGM service with moving me off that track and deciding to explore what else was out there. And through working just a temp job at the churchwide office, once I finished the master's degree, I found my way into the churchwide organization. I happened to also be in Chicago, so there was some serendipity there. But I discovered while working there that this whole network of state-based advocacy and Washington, D.C. advocacy existed in the church. And I grew up as an ELCA Lutheran in South Dakota and had no idea this was a thing. So I did some informational interviews, including with a certain Amy Reumann and a few other folks who were willing to take a call from some random 25-year-old who was trying to get a sense of what opportunities for service there were in the church. Luckily, opportunities arose with a couple of our states, and I applied to this position in Colorado, and they said yes. And part of that, I think, was that I had served the church and had some global experience, and our former bishop, like our new bishop, was a missionary. So saw some value in that experience. So that's what's brought me into it. It's kind of a winding path, but that's how it always goes, right?
Uh, Last week we talked about global mission in the church and heard from leaders in the synod about how the companion synod relationships have changed and shaped their lives and ministries. And so you're another example of that.
Great.
We've also looked at social teaching, And I think one of the perennial questions is, how does this get from being a dry document to something that lives? And so my question is, how do you use the church's social teaching in your advocacy work in Colorado?
Yes, certainly. Moving from the word on the page to the word lived into the world is the perennial challenge, I think, of any institution. And I'm grateful that our advocacy work in all of the states, again, and in DC and in New York, is the whole purpose is to make that word live in the world and to have it impact the world that we live in. Um, in Colorado, we are advised by a policy committee of lay and rostered people in the church. And that committee, among other things, develops our policy agenda every year. The sort of main substantive items on it don't necessarily change so much, but the details certainly change from year to year based on the political conditions and what's possible and what emphasis we want to place on different issues that are, rising up within the larger church. So that social teaching directly informs what positions we take on our policy agenda. In fact, and I'm sure any of the directors would tell you as well that the positionality we have as a Lutheran church is entirely bounded by our social teaching, the ELCA social teaching. So we do not take any position that we cannot in some place, point to or trace back to our social teaching and our understanding of the gospel. So that's sort of the higher level thing. The the more nitty gritty part of it is that policy agenda then shapes how we engage during our legislative session. For us, it's a 4-month session that starts in January and ends in early May. It's kind of fast and furious for that reason. So it's not a year-round endeavor. So we're racing to get stuff done. That helps us keep our heads during the legislative session and basically speak to and get involved with and impact things that are shaped by that social teaching. For us as well, we're a state that has ballot measures. We are voting on 14 of them this fall. So the social teaching of the LCA also shapes how we engage in ballot measures, which are nonpartisan, but they are substantive matters of public policy. So the church does have something to say often to those kinds of things. So the positions we take on all those ballot measures are also directly guided by the teaching of the church.
Yeah, I've never lived in a ballot measure state, and I'd love to sometime.
The ballot
us,
just keeps unfolding.
yeah.
It's unfold more and more dimensions. It's amazing. Yeah.
So what's an example of a success story?
Yeah, it's I noticed you use the singular, not the plural, so you're going to force me to pick one, which
Because we don't have time.
I know it's tough to do that, but I guess the big one that I like to point to from recent years, again, one of several is our advocacy to end capital punishment in Colorado. And this is I bring this up for a couple of reasons. One, we have very specific social teaching in the ELCA about capital punishment, which I guess made our position on the issue a little more straightforward than some, because sometimes, as my colleagues will tell you, we're kind of reading between the lines to parse how can we speak into something based on what's in a social statement or whatever. But our statement on capital punishment is pretty clear, and so I also bring it up too because this was a long campaign that preceded my becoming the director here. This was 10 plus years of faithful advocacy among the faith community, Lutheran advocacy, as well as some ecumenical interfaith organizations, groups that really helped drive the movement to finally get this done in Colorado. I'm very proud of that too, because of that interfaith cooperation. We really had a very unified presence. Our previous bishop spoke into this issue multiple times, and as often happens with public policy, it took 3 or 4 go-rounds in the legislature to get somewhere. And the bill was finally passed in March of 2020. So God bless, we got it done like a week before the legislature shut down. Of course, I'll just say by way of concluding that there are There have been follow-ups to this work as well, as there often are with our, a big campaign to get a certain bill or ballot measure passed. There are after effects that we might not predict, or there's follow-along work we know we're going to have to do. In our case, we have a ballot measure this year that is adjusting some of our statutory language around what used to be called capital offenses as it relates to exemptions for bail. That's, one of the things that we learn after we pass, major legislation like that. But we're very proud of that effort.
Yeah, policy work is one where you're actually never done. It's not just about passing the bill, it's then going back to fix it or fund it,
Amen.
over and over and over again,
So many
like much of the rest of life. And then quickly, this is a season I think a lot of people are struggling, and some are apprehensive of the future or what may come with a new election and the state of the world. What's bringing you hope right now?
I really like that question too. It just so happens, by way of context for all of you to know, we as the state directors and some of our DC staff were supposed to be meeting in Orlando this week, and we're obviously not in Orlando, so that we can be out of the way of what will probably be recovery efforts and post hurricane stuff. But that meant that we gathered this morning, and we were actually talking about some things that got me thinking about this very question, because it is a challenging season, and we're all kind of looking for support from one another. And again, not just those of us who are professionals in this work, but all of us who are engaged voters and members of this polity. I guess the biggest thing that comes to mind is remembering that it has never been the case in the past or now or in the future that politics is the thing that will save us. And that's, I think, important perspective that I raise, not to diminish the importance of politics, because obviously it's incredibly important. And I make my living at it, and I'm honored to serve the church in that sphere. But I'm also cognizant that we rest on a hope that it goes deeper than politics, and that we rest in the hope of what God has accomplished through Jesus Christ on the cross, and that we are gifted to know that God accompanies us through all of this turbulence and all of this discontent, and God meets us wherever we're going. And so it's not to say that those turbulent times may not be ahead of us or be engulfing us right now, but to remember that God is with us and walking through all of this with us, and that we're not alone in it.
Thank you, Peter. That'll preach. And that could even show up in a sermon yet. So thank you for that reflection.
Thank you.
Okay, from the Rocky Mountain Synod to New Jersey, the Garden State. Sarah, could you introduce yourself? Tell us about where you serve.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Sarah Lilia. I'm actually ordained and serve in New Jersey. I am the director of the Lutheran Policy Office here in our state. We've gone through a couple variations since I've been the director. We started as a standalone organization more closely affiliated with the New Jersey Council of Churches. And then for a time worked with Episcopalians and did a kind of a pilot experimental thing called Lutherans Episcopal Advocacy, and then pivoted to now Lutherans engaging in advocacy ministry. And so we keep reinventing ourselves and really keep working. We've been around for 40 years, but we're always looking for new ways and new partners to be effective in this work. So that's who I am. Thanks.
So you're a walking ecumenical advertisement.
Kind of.
Okay. So how did you get involved in this?
Yeah, so I actually am ordained, and I served a parish and then became a fellow in the American Association of Pastoral Counselors, and was working and running a counseling office. Primarily, my work was focused on women and children, and particularly single moms and women survivors of domestic violence. And that work is really hard, as you can imagine. And I just say this with all due respect. There got to be a place in my professional days where I could close my eyes and the client was different, but the story was the same. the patterns, the structures, the issues that these women were facing, it became so clear to me that there were structural issues and structural barriers for women to thrive and for their children to get the appropriate care that they needed. That once sort of that insight comes to you, can't unknow that, So within a year or two after that, the position in New Jersey to be the director of the office was then called Lutheran Office of Governmental Ministries, became open, and I had to apply. I just felt that from my experience on the ground, we needed to do some real systemic changes in policy to support women and children in New Jersey.
Tell us how you've worked in that area.
Well, we've done all kinds of things, everything from TANF, the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. Our TANF support has been so pathetic. We've worked over the last 10 years to gradually increase that aid for women. We've gradually worked on what we call we all know that there are SNAP benefits, and that's a federal program tied to the Farm Bill. We've worked in New Jersey to put supplemental aid in as well. And so we have something called the Food State Purchase Program, which is a state public policy. It's through a state budget to augment and to amplify the aid that's available for women and children, and other seniors and others who are food insecure. We continue to work on child care, and particularly child care credits for moms so they can go back to work and have high quality childcare that they can afford. We continue to work on child tax credits. We've been able to put into the state budget for several years now child tax credits for all families who have children to be able to receive some benefits. We continue to work on EITC, which is the Earned Income Tax Credit. So we really do the work in New Jersey takes the shape, honestly, Amy, of a lot of economic empowerment. We work very closely with that social statement on just sustainable livelihood for all, and fair tax policies and fair conditions and wages for women and immigrants in the state of New Jersey. So that's really, that economic umbrella is a piece of our work that we couldn't do without that social statement. We use it all the time. And it really is about, in the state of New Jersey, what's driving hunger is economic instability, is poverty, frankly. And so whatever we can do to alleviate poverty aids in people's health and their well-being.
Yeah, there's a reason why our state office work is supported through grants from ELCA World Hunger, because these systemic causes that drive people to come to food pantries and congregation-based nutrition programs, this connection is part of a holistic way that we as a church have been committed to for 40 some years. From the very beginning of the World Hunger Program. So you said what motivates you, and it's this, partly this experience of working with women and children, and then that brought you into policy and all these great things you're doing on economic empowerment. How do you know this matters to Lutherans in New Jersey?
Well, that's a really great question. I do a lot of congregational engagement. I teach summer school pretty much every year. We do 6 sessions on various topics on Zoom. And right now I'm doing similar to this, we're doing 6 weeks on civic engagement. And of course, I'm invited to preach. I publish a weekly newsletter every week, go figure. And then at the end of the week, we publish a whatever happened to that bill issue, which kind of brings back everything. And so we do a lot of engagement with Lutherans. What I will tell you in New Jersey, for those of you who aren't familiar with our state, which is a little bit crazy, we have home rule here, which means that none of the legislators have offices in Trenton. Their only office is in the home district. And so that means every congregation in these municipalities have pretty incredible access to their state legislators, because the legislators' offices are around the corner from where the church is. So it has really been amazing to engage Lutherans in, calling folks and saying, hey, this legislator in this district, we need to try to help them understand this policy issue we're working on. Will you go with me to their office so we can, have a meeting and talk about it? And it's amazing how responsive Lutherans are to go to sit with their legislator and meet them and to have a really honest, concerning conversation about the moral imperatives or the personal stories or the biblical teachings or our faith's mandates in addressing some of these issues of poverty. So yeah, Lutherans care deeply about our neighbors, and we care deeply about the poor. And I find sometimes that the city governments think that, oh, those people in the suburbs don't really care about those people experiencing homelessness, or they don't want to talk about it, and are shocked to find out that suburban congregations are deeply concerned and passionate about housing insecurity and people who are house burdened. And so, yeah, it's very gratifying to see how many Lutherans really are willing to spend a couple hours and meet with our legislators and talk about these policy issues.
What I hear you describing is faith coming alive,
Yeah.
in certain ways of applying social teaching, scripture, serving ministries, whether it's no matter where that location is, to a concern about poverty and equity and justice. And so thank you for the ways in which you plant those seeds, water them, and reap that harvest. So
Well, it's that's why the state office. Forgive me, Amy. That's why state office is so important in New Jersey. It's because we are. It's about boots on the ground in New Jersey. It's about getting to those state offices, the state legislators' offices, and they always have time for us. We might, not get a meeting tomorrow afternoon. It may be next Monday, but we're going to have a meeting. I mean, so we really do have incredible leverage and gifts, because this is a state that does pride itself in its accessibility to legislators.
it's great. Wish we could clone New Jersey's, which I
No,
didn't.
no, not always. No, there's all kinds
Didn't
of
know
things.
I'd say that tonight.
Yeah.
Okay. We won't get to the see me side tonight. So what gives you hope, Sarah?
Well, I think that very thing and when I say, I call Lutherans and ask them to come to the state to legislative meetings, I also, as you said, sort of have this lovely network of interfaith partners and advocates. And so there was a very conservative Republican legislator from the Northwest part of the United States who wasn't always sympathetic to some of our issues. And I called him one afternoon and I said, can we come talk to you? The faith community wants to come talk to you about some issues around guns and around violence related to gun violence. And so he said, sure, and we got the meeting, and we sat down and introduced ourselves. He said, so you don't look like my constituency. I mean, you're a part of my constituency, but where's the Jewish community? Where's the Muslim community? Where are the rest of the constituents who live in this district? I'd like to hear from them too. Which honestly, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, a kick in the pants is a movement forward. So, I mean, it was a great conversation with him, because it really got us to go back and say, wait a minute, he's absolutely right. When we walk into a legislator's office, we bring our neighbors, we bring our faith companions, we bring those who have similar shared values about justice and peace. And so now when we have those legislative meetings, we may have a rabbi in the room, and we may have an imam in the room. And it's really grown into a real representation of the state of New Jersey and their faith principles that are alive here. So that gives me a lot of hope.
It gives me hope too. They say to be Lutheran is to be ecumenical and sometimes interfaith, and in many different ways, including this one.
Yeah.
So thank you. So switching gears, not a lot, but a little, because we're going to move now to focus where we started in the very first session, which is what can a congregation, what can faith leaders do in an election year? And of course, the election is a whole lot closer and omnipresent in some ways right now, with just a few more weeks to go. And so just want to talk to first Tracy DePasquale about what are they doing in Pennsylvania, and what can we learn of what can still happen on the election countdown, as well as the really important work the church could do afterwards.
Hi, welcome. Thank you, everyone, for the invitation. My name is Tracy DePasquale. I'm the director of Lutheran Advocacy Ministry in Pennsylvania. And if Pennsylvania is ringing any bells with regard to the election, that we are a key swing state. And that means that there's a lot happening here. A little bit about Lutheran Advocacy Ministry in Pennsylvania. We're the oldest of the ELCA state public policy offices. We're marking our 45th year this year. And my background, I came into this, if you've, if Karen has dropped the link in the chat, I started at environmental science, became a journalist, and then a high school civics teacher, and was in seminary when someone, well, I had worked for our congregation when my children were small. Someone forwarded me the job description for LAMPA and says, this has you written all over it. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can do everything that I've been doing as a sense of vocation and do it openly as a matter of faith. So in all of those things, that winding path, as so many people have described, I felt that it had prepared me to do this work. And now I get to do it with faith forward and to equip others to do the same. So particularly, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, thank you, because you bring a lot of different gifts to it. And thank you for speaking about it as a vocation, because we all have a vocation to public life. And some of us here have really specific calls, which you're embodying one kind.
What we're doing in Pennsylvania as LAMPA, I think I should back up a little bit more and say that I think the engagement that we've been involved with, particularly this year, is related to a number of factors. I mentioned Pennsylvania's pivotal role as a swing state, as well as being seen as having a somewhat elevated potential for election-related violence, given that so many of those involved in January 6th events in the U.S. Capitol were from this Commonwealth. Surveys of our network, conversations with bishops, told us that people were looking for ways to build bridges and have meaningful dialogue, depolarize ourselves, and de-escalate conflict. We'd been exploring these and offering these types of trainings in person and online for several years. We've also been helping Lutherans provide election support for several cycles. Staff and volunteers calling each of our 67 county elections offices to say thank you to the staff for their work, to offer prayers, and to ask what they need, whether that be poll workers or polling sites, anything, and to also leave a name, the name of the congregation, and contact information so that they can follow up, and that congregation can have a relationship and be a resource as needed. We've recruited a lot of poll workers, a lot of Lutheran poll workers, and actually beyond in Pennsylvania over the past several years. This year, partners who know our work, Lutherans, the ELCA's reach in Pennsylvania, and our denomination's nonpartisan civic engagement reached out to us to invite us to connect with Common Ground USA, which is part of an international peacekeeping organization that operates in 35 countries. We're part of their Resilient States project, working to promote dialogue and prevent violence here in the Commonwealth. Some of the things that we've done with them or with their support was a press conference and the development of an ecumenical and interreligious statement called Choices and Voices for Peace. It was a statement that was drafted by all 7 of our ELCA bishops, and then they extended an invitation to their ecumenical and interreligious partners around the state. And we held a press conference in the state capitol exactly 2 months out from the election. By that time, I think we had 350 signatories on the statement, and we've kept it open so that not only religious leaders, but lay leaders can sign on to it as well. We've even had lawmakers sign on. As a result, there was a lot of media coverage about religious leaders calling for peace and calling on the daily choice that we make to recognize each other as children of God and not as enemies. And so that was a good thing. Another reason for the media to turn to faith leaders and invite them to this, basically. After that press conference, we invited the 100 or so faith leaders who were present in the Capitol to a press conference, not a press conference, a Love Anyway feast in a nearby congregation. Was basically, you could call it a potluck for peace, although we had boxed lunches from Panera. But we used a toolkit that was developed by an organization called Preemptive Love, to encourage conversations among people, to invite them to share their authentic selves, and to get to know one another and bridge divides. And so we have also seeded 10 of these Love Anyway feasts to happen before the election here in Pennsylvania. And then Preemptive Love is hoping to support more than 2,000 of these to be held in the US between Election Day and Thanksgiving. Some of the doing trustworthy elections information, being a source of accurate information that people can rely on to share with everyone. And our synods are also engaging with this, from dates and how to register, where to get training, how to report problems, how to sign up to become a poll worker, how the electoral process actually works each step of the way, because so many people just don't understand all of the steps. And this, we think, will help shape expectations and head off, hopefully, any misinformation and rumors. We've done digital peace building training to teach us all how to think critically before sharing, the best ways to engage people online to de-escalate conflict, correct myths or disinformation, and to build trust, and to think critically about what we post ourselves. 40 days of prayer before an election, we invited rostered leaders across the state to develop reflections for each of the 40 days before the election. And then one of our bishops has written one for the day after the election. And these have been enormously popular to ground ourselves in scripture and prayer, to lower that sense of anxiety and remind ourselves of who holds all of this. And more than 330 people signed up just to receive these devotions and have been sharing it with their friends. We're also encouraging our congregations to host ecumenical and interreligious prayer vigils for election workers in their communities the Sunday before or on election eve, not praying for a certain outcome, but for people to be able to carry out their duties with diligence and in safety. So I will pause there. That's what we're doing.
Yeah, that's dizzying. And so many fronts on which to provide good information, to equip leaders, to just say the word potluck, and you'll get Lutherans there. But thinking about that as a way to build trust and understanding, not just before the election, but also that emphasis on after. Just because of time, we're going to have to pivot to hope, which is always a good thing. What's bringing you hope in this election season?
I think it's being at tables with people who, in some of our advocacy work, we've never been on the same side of the table, but we're all in the same room working towards peaceful elections, nonviolence, like the commitment to that above all else. And that's helpful. Also, just the gratitude with which this invitation to sign on to Choices and Voices for Peace, the gratitude with which that was received, that brings me hope.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And we'll all be watching Pennsylvania, of course. Now for more
Prayers
reasons,
appreciated.
now for more reasons than possibility of election-related violence, but also because we know there's election-related bridge building, prayer, and unity. So that's very inspiring. Thank you.
Thanks.
Now, what else can we do before, during, after the election? Kim Bobo is going to join us. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get into this, Kim? 2 months from retirement.
So I'm Kim Bobo. I serve with the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. We are the Lutheran Public Policy Network in Virginia. I was reading recently about the history of the founding of Virginia Interfaith, and the Lutherans were just instrumental in founding us 42 years ago with the mission of the faith community having sort of a strong presence on public policies in Virginia. So, the Lutherans have continued to be a strong part of sort of this interfaith network in Virginia. I've only been in Virginia 9 years. Before that, I've done faith-based advocacy most of my life, starting out when I got out of college working for Bread for the World. So have really been in this advocacy space for a long time. And again, I think why I got into it and why I continue to be excited about the work is because we're able to make a difference on a scale that's just impossible to do as an individual. There's so many serious problems in the world and in our nation. Um, and as an individual, it's just really hard to have much of an impact on them. But if you join together with others and you work on those public policies, you can make much more substantial change than we can on our own. And I see it all the time, and that, to your last question, that gives me hope, right? That by working together with others, we can make a difference on these things.
Cutting to the chase, thanks, Kim, as always. So tell us the impact that Virginia people of faith are having this year around the election.
So on the elections, well, first, I want to say that I loved what Tracy was doing in Pennsylvania. And so we just copied her voice choices. And that's actually one of the beauties of having not only these individual state offices, but that we function as a network so that we can learn from one another, share with one another, and frankly, copy one another when it makes sense. And so we literally took the statement that the Lutherans had crafted in Pennsylvania, and we switched out Pennsylvania and stuck in Virginia. And so they did it 2 months out, and we did a statement 1 month out, and had Stealing for Jesus, right? And again had hundreds of clergy who signed on and got incredibly great coverage around it, and again I think positioned the faith community as voices of peace in the election right now. So again, that's been the most recent thing that we've done. We've also, our volunteers have done postcarding to about 10,000 infrequent voters, just encouraging them to vote in the election, not telling them how to vote, but just encouraging people to vote. Um, we have quite a few, over 100 congregations that have pledged to be 100% voting congregations, and they hang this giant banner outside their congregation that says we're 100% voting, and then they work to live into that, which means trying to make sure everybody's registered, trying to get people to vote, preaching from the pulpit, doing bulletin inserts on voting, just really helping inform and equip the congregations to do that. Um, like some of my colleagues, we are recruiting people to be election protection people during the election. So we, last year, I think had 95 volunteers in that space. We'll probably have twice that many this year. Um, and then the last thing that we are trying for the first time, is in a couple cities, but particularly in Richmond, we're testing out doing souls to the polls. So there's only in Richmond, there's only one Sunday voting day. It's October 27th. And so we have connected with the 3 polling places and said we'd like to caravan people from congregations to the polls that Sunday to encourage people to vote. And we've lined up 3 different food trucks. They're going to serve fried fish and French fries. And so hopefully it's not quite a potluck, but We're excited about trying to encourage people as part of their faithfulness to actually go to the polls and to do it collectively. That voting is not, again, it's not just an individual effort, it's a community effort, trying to encourage us all to vote.
Kim, that's amazing. I love the food trucks, genius, and also canny. And I'm also thinking these, if you have over 100% voting congregations, I think of congregations trying to get 100% response on their stewardship, pledges, and that's really amazing. That many churches have been mobilized together.
One of
This is
my favorite stories, there's one church that when people join the church, the sort of welcome committee goes up to them and makes sure they're registered to vote as part of their membership in the church. Anyway, I love that.
beautiful. What do you think is going to be required after the election? What might church leaders want to think about now? Given that we may not know the results for days, there may be some unrest, there may be, you know, there may be places and hotspots to speak to. What do you think church leaders could or should be thinking about or resourcing themselves with?
Well, again, I think first, first we have to have patience in the democracy, right? That it may take a while, and so I think they can be voices urging patience, and that just because some of the votes take a while to come in doesn't mean that there's any corruption or failure in the system, right? So I think they can be voices of patience. Um, and then regardless of who wins, there's going to be people who are disappointed. Um, and so again, I think we have to um, urge people to be kind to one another. Again, the whole message of kindness and welcome to one another, I think, is an important message for the faith community. And then I think, regardless of who wins, there's going to be work to do. That's central work for the faith community, right? We were talking our colleagues talked earlier about that we were on a call earlier, and I think there's a lot of concern about what's going to happen on immigration, regardless of who wins, right? And so there will be a need to fairly quickly pivot to speaking the priorities around the faith community, around welcoming the stranger. So again, I think there's several different things that we can do.
Yeah, it's not done with the election. It's just starting, right? So maybe with a brief rest in between. Thank you, Kim. Um, we're going to switch topics, but not entirely, a little bit. And because of the high interest in Christian nationalism and how it's been showing up in our national discourse this year, in our theological discourse in churches, as well as in the work that these dear colleagues do in state houses as it's showing up in public policy. And so I'd like to invite Nick Bates to the podium. And first, Nick, tell us who you are and where you serve and how'd you get there?
Yeah, well, thanks so much. So my name is Nick Bates. I'm director of the Hunger Network in Ohio. We work to end hunger by addressing the root causes of poverty through public policy advocacy. And as a network of faith, people often say, well, what are those root causes of poverty that we address? And the answer is yes. Basically, any issue you name is a root cause of poverty in our communities. I got into nonprofit advocacy work through campus ministry at Capital University. We did an urban plunge retreat and we met some different organizations during that trip. And I met a group that was doing community organizing of homeless youth throughout the state of Ohio. So it really just this program, it wasn't faith-based, but we, definitely the model of accompaniment and, lifting up and amplifying voices was really centered to that work. And then I ended up doing that for many years. And then I went back, did what many people did during the Great Recession, went and hid out in grad school instead of trying to have to fundraise in a world where there wasn't many funds available in 2009, 2010, and that time. But when I was in grad school at Trinity Lutheran Seminary and Capital Law School, I decided to was feeling called to move towards consecration as a diaconal minister, now a deacon. And during our trip out to Gettysburg, similar to Peter, I met the fearless A.B. Reumann during that trip of our diaconal ministry formation event. And a few years later, she was willing to answer a phone call and help me get connected into this network. So Ohio, unlike some of the other states, did not have an ELCA advocacy office, but with all of the work going on at Ohio State House and how it's a large state, it's political importance and having a large Lutheran population, I was feeling more and more called to figure out how we start up a ELCA advocacy office here. By the advice of ELCA advocacy and other folks, we looked to work ecumenically, and that's how we formed and kind of brought together a lot of folks into the Hunger Network. So while we work on a whole host of issues, where do our congregations begin their justice work at? Is often when they start asking the question, why are there so many people coming into our food pantries? So that's kind of where we begin. And then we work with congregations and really then accompany folks forward from that position into figuring out what is it that they are feeling called, where are they being called to serve. Some very big into environmental issues. So that's where the network part of our organization, our ministry name comes in. It's really trying to then connect people around to different organizations and ministries that they're called to engage in, while we continue to kind of provide that support to lift up and amplify stories at our state house around policy. Unlike Peter, we have a full-time legislator, so we go basically 2 years straight with a few breaks in here and there for vacations for legislators.
Yeah. So Nick, how are you seeing Christian nationalism being present in the state house as well as in the elections?
Yeah. So at our state house, because as a result of the gerrymandering in Ohio, which hopefully will be, like Colorado, we have ballot initiatives. So hopefully we're going to fix that this upcoming November. But it has created a disconnect between our legislators and the communities, and it's made the legislative body responsive more to special interest and lobbyists and less to their neighbors in their community. So we've seen a whole host over the past 2 years of Christian nationalist bills related to education. We've seen a lot there banning the conversation of controversial topics at colleges and universities. That has not passed, but it's passed only one chamber. Attacks on the LGBTQI plus community, and then also a willingness to try to throw our right to have access to the ballot out the window last year with a special election. So this was interesting. They passed a law saying no more August special elections because they're costly, low turnout, not very democratic. 3 months later, after passing that law, legislators said, just kidding, we want to do a special election this August to take away citizens' right to the ballot. Luckily, we won that fight in that special election, August of 23, that allows us now to work on redistricting and other issues. The big thing with Christian nationalism right now, there are so many legislators who want to be able to come together and figure out how to serve their communities. But because of the dynamics and the strength that this has, they are forced into the politics of division. Because I think that's the big thing that Christian nationalism does, is it tries to divide those who are in and those who are out. So we saw these attacks on the LGBTQI plus community, and these can be difficult topics, as we engage them and try to figure out the nuance, what are appropriate healthcare procedures and policies and all this. There's a level of nuance and sensitivity and compassion that has to occur. So much so that they passed a bill to ban gender affirming care for minors. And we're not talking surgeries, those weren't occurring already. We're talking about counseling, use of a child's young adult's pronouns, hormone replacement therapy, medications and these sorts of things. And instead of being able to have a conversation about that, there's just a lot of stereotypes and fear mongering. And our governor, Republican Governor Mike DeWine, a lifelong Catholic, very Catholic in his faith, he vetoed this bill. But our General Assembly came back from one of their very few vacations early to override it. And a lot of these Christian nationalist bills that we've seen really are what I like to call the Lawyer Full Employment Act, because every single one ends up in the courts and is litigated. So it keeps all the lawyers in Columbus very well employed and very busy.
So what are some ways, just thinking about our lives and congregations, what are some ways at the congregation level we can inform ourselves about what Christian nationalism is and how it shows up and what we can do about it in our public life?
Yeah. Yeah. So I forget which book it was by Whitehead and Perry, and they broke it down into four categories of groups. There are the ambassadors of Christian nationalism, and then there are the accommodators. And I think the reality is we know a lot of these accommodators, people that might not fully embrace this Christian nationalist ideology, but are somewhat supportive of it, are looking at it. And I think within our congregations, these are the people we're sitting around, potlucks at. There are uncles at Thanksgiving dinner. They're the people that we know. And the thing I always want to come back to is the anxiety and fear that I think a lot of Christian nationalists and people that are trending that direction have is very real. There's fear, Ohio, I look at areas like Springfield and Youngstown, dying factory towns that are, and changing communities and these sorts of things. And people have to say, rents are rising, prices are rising, life is getting harder, wages aren't increasing. There's a lot of anxiety and fear in that. And that's very legitimate. And then the Christian nationalist messaging comes along and tries to provide a community, be with us, wear our shirts, go to our events. They try to create a community. They try to create easy answers and solutions. And they do that by creating a clear enemy. So I think as our congregations and within our families, the more that we can acknowledge and kind of empathize with the anxiety and fear that people have as legitimate. But then it's like, yes, rents are rising. Yes, food's getting more expensive. Yes, school violence is a big issue. No, the problem is not Haitian migrants living in the city of Springfield in Ohio. The problem is all these other corporate and economic factors that have been occurring for, generations. So I think when we can redirect towards actual solutions, and we can begin to have that conversation. I also think one of the big things that I have found over the past year is the more that we can have conversations, and we have to speak about our own story. The Cleveland baseball team, changed their name from the Cleveland Indians to the Cleveland Guardians a few years ago. And I was preaching down in Southern Ohio, and I made a joke about being a Cleveland sports fan because it's sad to be a Cleveland sports fan. But this gentleman came up to me afterwards and was like, well, you must be super angry about the name change and all that. And he was thought, and like, well, I remember what I wore to the games back in the 80s when I lived up there. And I remember the chants that I did. And then I pivoted to a positive story about the Guardians of Traffic statues that they're named for because it was something I saw coming in from the west side of town on a regular basis as a child. So I took where he wanted to have anger and I replaced it with my own personal story of hope. And that completely transformed the conversation. So I've tried to lean into that of, kind of owning my own vulnerabilities, my own brokenness. Because I think the last thing people want is, well, you're a bad person if you don't agree with me. People have anxiety and people are told, be angry at this group of people. But when we can say, well, let's just tone it down and come back and have a more civil conversation, I think we can do a lot of good.
Thank you, Nick. I think that's a wonderful example about how to meet people where they are and speak to them directly, compassionately, and that your own vulnerability can often be met with theirs. And I think it's that one-to-one relationship that sometimes makes that difference.
Mhm.
Um, can you give us one sentence on what gives you hope? Because we got to move on.
Yeah, my one sentence is community. The more that we can come together in community, and that I see community coming together to feed people, to work together to solve a collective problem. And to me, that's what politics is the community coming together to solve a problem.
Great. Thank you, Nick. And last not least, certainly, Pastor Aaron Jones. Who are you? Where do you serve? And why?
I am Pastor Erin Jones. I serve as the second chair in the symphony that is Lutheran Advocacy Ministry in Pennsylvania. My official title is very long. We don't have time for it. But I have been here just over a year. And yeah, Karen put it in the chat. It's half the chat. And so I live in Pittsburgh. So I try not to give Nick too hard of a time. And I have been here in Pittsburgh for a while. I got into faith and public policy. I was a political science and religion double major at St. Olaf College in Northfield, Minnesota, because I felt those two identities in me really strongly. And I was living, I grew up in Southern California, and the world tries to tell us, and these forces, especially of Christian nationalism, tries to tell us that there's only a certain way to be faithful in the public sphere as a Christian. And I felt very strongly that there was another way to do that. And so my whole adult life has been at this intersection. I did public policy work through Lutheran Volunteer Corps, where we worked with Latin American policy in Chicago. And then I went to the seminary, worked in outdoor ministries, did my Jonah runaway time in outdoor ministries, went to seminary and served a congregation in Southern California before coming and serving a couple congregations here in Pennsylvania. I had served on policy councils both in California, and I was on our policy council when I actually read okay, Tracy, close your ears. The job position had been open for a while, and I had known about it, and then I read it, and I finally, with new eyes, and said, oh, that's me. Sorry, we were waiting for me to actually read the job description, and so here I am. So that's how I got here.
Yeah. And I know you've been working with a particular emphasis, educational emphasis around Christian nationalism, that I'd love to hear a little more about.
Yeah, so similarly in college, I was introduced to the life and theology of Pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a German pastor theologian during World War II, who was part of the resistance against Hitler and the Nazi regime. And so early on in my time with LAMPA, Tracy and I were talking about seeing Christian nationalism. Like she mentioned, a number of Pennsylvanians were at the January 6th insurrection. A number of leaders here ascribe to that. Those forces are really rooted here. And so we were thinking of ways in which to counter that narrative here in Pennsylvania. And I had this background in Bonhoeffer studies, and then Tracy got connected elsewhere to Dr. Lori Brandt Hale, who is the president of the Bonhoeffer Society English Language Section. She's a professor at Augsburg University in Minneapolis. And so together we said that society, that academic society, has been for a long time now having some of these same conversations that I was feeling, that, oh, there is a narrative out there about how to be faithful in the public sphere. We think Bonhoeffer offers a particular answer to that. What has become clear in the last decade is that the Christian nationalist movement as it has with the words of Jesus, has taken the words of Bonhoeffer and the legacy of Bonhoeffer and has manipulated it for their own purposes. He's quoted in the opening pages of Project 2025. You have probably read or have seen in your bookstore a very popular biography of Bonhoeffer by a self-proclaimed Christian nationalist who uses Bonhoeffer really explicitly to support that agenda and that way of being in the world. And so the Bonhoeffer Society and we kind of came together, and Dr. Brant Hale wrote this really beautiful curriculum that takes the legacy of Bonhoeffer and helps congregations, groups, communities, whoever wants to engage in this curriculum to see how Bonhoeffer offers us a different way of engaging in the world, a way that is rooted in love of neighbor, a way that is doesn't, like Nick said, Christian nationalists prey on like having really clear answers, really black and white, yes and no, ins and outs. Bonhoeffer has zero easy answers, zero, it is all gray for Bonhoeffer, except when it comes to how do I care for those who are vulnerable. And so this curriculum really helps us center that question. And that is ultimately the question of what we've all been talking about why we do this work. It is out of love of neighbor. This love that we have received from Jesus should flow out of us to care for others. And so that is what we've been doing. That is our contribution to this discourse around Christian nationalism.
And with all of this great work, theological work, educational work, resourcing and connecting work, what gives you hope?
I think just that my parish before working at Lampa was not Lutheran. It was an ecumenical partner, and a lot of my parishioners there were ex-evangelicals, people who are coming out of traditions that are more rooted in Christian nationalist narratives. And we're so hungry for a word of grace. We're so hungry for a word of a church that cared about the vulnerable rather than seeking power for themselves. And so the fact that like this network exists, the fact that this work exists, the fact that this church and our social statements exist was mind-blowing and continues to be mind-blowing to people all across the work that we do. They are so grateful when they encounter people who are just living a different way. So my hope is that that is needed, and to see people really get excited about it.
Thank you, Erin. This has been so much great information from everyone about so many things happening that we're connected to through the Lutheran family, but also so many things we can do, wherever God is calling us, both in this election year and beyond. I would just close us out with, well, first I'd say thank you for those who came and shared. This is recorded, and so I see lots of good material to use again in other places because the work of these state public policy offices, I think the word vocation is so woven through it. And we all have a vocation to witness to God in our public lives and public selves. And these individuals have a distinct vocation that they exercise so faithfully and well. And I'm so grateful for them and for all that they do. So then I will close us out with a benediction blessing.
Pastor Amy, before
yes.
you bless us, let me, on behalf of the Synod, thank you and thank all of the wonderful people that you have introduced us to. Let me also thank Karen for being such good support. I have a feeling that what you've done in this 6 weeks is planted some seeds. And it may take a while, but I'm eager to see the growth. So thank you.
Absolutely. God gives the growth, and we'll see where that goes. Um, so this is from the Worship Resources for a National Election resource we shared. It's on the website from the first session, and it's a blessing I think that is appropriate right now for this time of year and this time of life. So go out into the world in peace. Have courage. Hold on to what is good. Return no one evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak and help the suffering. Honor all people. Love and serve the Lord, rejoicing in the power of the Holy Spirit. Beloved in the Lord, God has shown you what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. Go in peace.